The first thing Mara noticed was the silence arriving early. It wasn't the normal London quiet, the shared truce people make at the end of a day, eyes down, shoulders in. This was different. It moved through the carriage like a curtain pulled sharply across a window. She'd stepped onto the Piccadilly line at Leicester Square with her coat damp from the rain and her head full of small worries. An email she hadn't answered, a bill she'd half forgotten, the dull ache that comes from living too fast for too long. The train was moderately busy, not packed but dense enough that you had to angle your body to claim a patch of air. A couple laughed too loudly near the doors. Someone's headphones hissed tinny music. An older man tapped impatient fingers against his knee. Then, without any visible cue, every sound fell away at once. Not the mechanical roar of the train. That stayed. The rails still sang, the carriage still rattled, but the human layer went flat, as if someone had pressed mute. The laugh stopped mid-breath. The tapping halted. Heads dipped in unison, not out of fatigue but decision. Even the man with the headphones removed them, like he'd suddenly remembered an appointment. Mara's first thought was absurd. Maybe the lights had dimmed and she'd missed it, some instinctive response to a change. But the fluorescent strip above her still glared. The adverts still stared down in bright colors, promising holidays and phone plans like the world was normal. She looked around. A woman in a pale scarf stared very hard at her own hands. A teenager's eyes were fixed on his shoes, not blinking. A businessman's jaw tightened as if he was holding something in his mouth that wasn't food. Across the aisle, a man, mid-30s, trim, forgettable in a dark jacket, met Mara's eyes for half a second and then looked away. His expression wasn't fear or confusion. It was readiness. The train slid into the tunnel's deeper dark, the windows turning into mirrors. Mara saw her own face reflected back, pale and uncertain, and behind her reflection, she saw something else, movement that didn't match the stillness. A hand that wasn't attached to her body drifted close to her bag. And the silence held, perfectly, like a held breath. Mara's fingers closed around the strap of her bag so hard the knuckles whitened. She didn't jerk away. She didn't shout. Something in her understood, instantly, that sound was the point. She turned her head, slow, as if she'd simply noticed a poster. The hand withdrew. A young man, early 20s, neat hair, charming face that could have sold charity subscriptions, smiled faintly and looked elsewhere. His palm was open now, innocent. The rest of the carriage remained in that unnatural hush, the kind you hear in a theater after the lights go down. Mara swallowed. Her throat made a small, traitorous click. No one reacted. But she felt it, a tension shifting like a school of fish, bodies subtly angling, a choreography too clean to be accidental. 3 people clustered near the central pole without looking like they'd moved. A woman with a pushchair adjusted her position so the wheels blocked half the aisle. A man with a folded newspaper, who hadn't been reading at all, tilted it just enough to hide someone's hands. A pickpocket, Mara thought, and then immediately corrected herself. Not a pickpocket, a crew. Mara's phone vibrated. A message from her sister. "Did you get home okay?" She didn't answer. She didn't dare move her thumbs quickly. She tucked the phone away. At the far end of the carriage, near the door connecting to the next, a short man with a shaved head leaned close to the overhead speaker panel, not touching it, not obviously. Just close enough that if you weren't looking, you'd assume he was listening for the next announcement. Then came a sound, so small Mara wasn't sure she'd heard it. A brief tone, almost like a notification chirp that didn't belong to any known phone. Too clean, too precise. It slipped under the train's roar and vanished. The effect was immediate. The silence didn't break, it changed shape. People shifted again. The charming young man's hands moved, quick as a blink, toward a woman's coat pocket. Another person bumped gently into a tourist couple, apologetic without speaking. The pushchair rolled an inch, blocking a sightline. Mara's skin prickled. This wasn't random theft. This was timed, coordinated, rehearsed. And she realized with cold clarity she was watching the moment they'd chosen to act. The door stayed shut, the train stayed moving, and everyone was behaving like they'd been trained to pretend nothing was happening. Mara inhaled through her nose and tried to remember what her father used to say when she was small and nervous. If the room goes quiet, find out who wanted it that way. At Holborn, the carriage exhaled. The doors opened with their usual sigh, and suddenly the human noise poured back in like water released from a dam. A cough, a laugh, a shuffle of feet. Someone saying, "Sorry, mate," as if apology could smooth the edges of anything. Mara stepped off with the crowd, her pulse punching her ribs. She didn't know why she stepped off. Instinct, maybe, or the fear that if she stayed, the next silence would be worse. On the platform, she moved to the wall and pretended to check her phone. She watched the carriage through the window. The charming young man remained inside, now talking to someone, his expression easy. The woman with the scarf adjusted her bag strap and didn't look at anyone. The shaved-head man stepped out, not hurried, and walked down the platform with the calm of someone who knew exactly where the cameras were. Mara's hand trembled as she opened her banking app. She hated herself for it, but she needed proof she wasn't imagining things. 2 notifications were waiting, a small card transaction she didn't recognize, and a contactless tap, recent. Her stomach dropped. It hadn't been her imagination. Something had been taken. Not her entire wallet, her cards were still there. But 1 tap was enough to test, enough to see if a stolen detail worked, enough to mark her as useful. She turned in a slow circle, scanning faces. People streamed around her. Tourists squinting at maps, commuters marching with purpose, a busker's distant guitar echoing down the tunnel. Everyone looked ordinary. Everyone looked like everyone. And that, she realized, was the problem. A crew like that could hide in plain sight forever. A voice behind her said, "You all right?" Mara flinched. A TFL staff member, high-vis jacket, kind eyes, stood a few feet away. He wasn't close enough to be threatening. He wasn't looking at her bag or her phone, just her face, the way people do when they suspect you might be about to cry or faint. Mara forced a smile that felt like stretching stiff fabric. "Yeah, just long day." The staff member nodded, and for a second Mara thought he'd move on. Instead, he lowered his voice. "Did it go quiet on your carriage?" Mara's blood went cold. "What?" He held her gaze, steady. "It's been happening. Not every day, not every train, but enough." Mara stared at him as if he'd spoken a secret into her mouth. "Why don't you do something?" His jaw tightened. "We try, but no one reports it. And without reports, it's a rumor, urban legend, the silent carriage." He glanced up at the CCTV dome above them, and some of the footage comes back missing. Mara's throat dried. "Missing?" He nodded once, grim, like someone knew when to look away. He took a small step back, as if distancing himself from danger. "If it happens again, Don't confront them. Don't shout. Just get off and report it.
Mara wanted to ask how, to whom, but the next train arrived, blowing wind and noise down the platform. The staff member's expression changed, back to neutral, like flipping a mask. He turned away, and Mara was left with the echo of his question ringing in her skull. Did it go quiet on your carriage? Mara didn't sleep. She lay in her flat in Islington, listening to the city outside, the occasional siren, the distant hum of traffic, the building's pipes clicking like impatient fingers. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that coordinated stillness and felt the pressure of a room deciding to become silent. By morning, she'd canceled her card and filed a report that felt like shouting into fog. The bank was polite. The online form was efficient. Nothing about it touched the real fear, the sense that she'd been moved like a piece on someone else's board. She tried to leave it. She really did. She went to work. She answered emails. She laughed at a colleague's joke at the right time. But her body carried the memory of that hush, the way skin carries a bruise. That evening, she took the tube again, because that's what Londoners do. You get back on the thing that scares you because the city doesn't care about your feelings. She told herself she'd be fine. Different line, different carriage. She'd stand near the door. She'd keep her bag in front. She'd be alert. At King's Cross, she stepped into a carriage that smelled faintly of wet wool and deodorant. It was crowded. The usual symphony of small noises returned, scrolling, breathing, muttered conversations. Mara relaxed by half a degree. Then, the tone came. Not loud, not an announcement. A tiny, clean note that slid beneath the chatter, like a needle under skin. The carriage fell quiet. This time, Mara felt it with horrifying certainty. It wasn't random. It wasn't a vibe. It was a signal, and people were responding. Someone near the doors shifted, blocking the exit. A tall man angled his body to obscure sightlines. A woman's shopping bag swung outward, covering a seat pocket. Mara's heart pounded. She scanned for the source and saw, near the overhead panel again, a different figure. A woman in a smart coat, hair tucked neatly under a hat, holding a phone close to her chest, like she was reading something. But her thumb wasn't scrolling. It hovered, poised, like she was waiting to press play again. Mara's mind raced. Report it, the staff member had said. Don't shout, don't confront. But the carriage was moving. The next stop was a minute away. The doors were blocked. Mara's hand slid into her pocket and found her keys, the jagged metal edges cold. She didn't want to use them. She just wanted something real in her palm. She leaned slightly toward a man beside her, mid-40s, tired face, suit jacket creased from long wear, and whispered, "Something's happening." His eyes flicked to her and away. He didn't respond. He didn't even blink faster. He was in it, Mara realized, either crew or trained by fear to comply. The silence tightened around her like rope. Then from somewhere deeper in the train, a child's voice pierced the hush. "Mom, why is everyone being weird?" The mother hissed. "Shh, too late." Heads turned, not toward the child, toward the mother's bag. Mara watched a hand glide, elegant, toward the zipper. And in that instant, She understood the purpose of the silence. It wasn't just to hide theft. It was to make the few who noticed feel alone. The doors opened at Russell Square, and Mara pushed through before the crowd could reorganize. She stepped onto the platform like a swimmer breaking the surface, lungs burning for air that tasted of metal and dust. Behind her, the carriage sound returned in a rush, people talking, laughing, scrolling, as if the last minute hadn't happened, as if it could be erased by noise. Mara turned and watched through the window. The woman in the hat stepped off as well, calm, unhurried. She didn't look like she'd been caught. She looked like she'd finished a task. The tall man who'd blocked the doors followed her. They didn't walk together, but they moved with the same rhythm. Mara's hands shook. She didn't want to chase them. Every sensible part of her screamed not to, but she couldn't let it go now. Not when she'd seen it happen twice. Not when she'd seen how easily the crew used the carriage itself as a weapon. She followed at a distance, blending into the flow of commuters. The woman in the hat stopped by a poster and pretended to read it. The tall man continued, turning left. Mara's instincts told her the separation was deliberate, a net widening. She hesitated. Then she saw something that made her stomach tighten. A third figure, a teenage boy, hoodie up, earphones in, walked past the woman in the hat and tapped her shoulder lightly, like a careless passerby. The woman's hand slipped something into the boy's palm without either of them breaking stride. It was quick, invisible, intimate in its efficiency. Mara lifted her phone as if checking messages and snapped a photo. The boy's head turned a fraction, and Mara felt a sudden, sharp awareness. She'd been seen. Not by him, by someone else. A man leaned against the tiled wall near the stairs, holding a coffee cup. His eyes were on Mara, expression blank. Not aggressive, not friendly. Assessing. Mara's blood turned thin. She forced her gaze away, walking toward the exit with casual speed. She didn't run. Running would confirm guilt or fear. She walked like a woman late for something ordinary. Behind her, she heard footsteps, matching her pace. She reached the ticket gates and tapped out. The barrier opened with a green flash. She stepped through, and for a split second, she thought she'd made it. Then the barrier behind her flashed red. A delayed denial. A glitch. Or, she realized with a jolt, someone tapping a different card. Someone creating a small problem to slow her down. "Excuse me," a voice said, close. Mara turned. The man with the coffee stood a step away now. His face was unremarkable. His tone was polite. His eyes were flat. "You dropped something." He held out her bank card. Mara's stomach flipped. She reached for her wallet and found it still there. The card he held out wasn't missing. It wasn't hers. The name on it wasn't hers. The man smiled slightly. "Must be someone else's then." Mara didn't take it. I don't know whose that is." He tilted his head. Still polite. "Funny."
Because it came from your pocket. Mara's pulse hammered. This wasn't about the card. This was about a message. He was telling her they could put anything on her, anything in her pocket, anything on her record. Mara stepped back, voice tight. "Leave me alone." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just watch where you walk, yeah?" And then he turned and disappeared into the crowd, coffee cup swinging lightly at his side. Mara stood frozen, realizing the crew wasn't just stealing. They were controlling the story. Mara went to the British Transport Police, or at least she tried. She found the desk, filled out forms, repeated herself until the words felt meaningless. A tired officer listened, nodding, asking questions that sounded like a script. Time, line, station, description, what was taken, what was lost. Mara showed the photo she'd taken. The officer leaned in, squinted, and then leaned back with a sigh. "It's not clear," he said. "Faces are obscured." "It's something," Mara insisted. "And the silence. There's a signal, a sound. People stop talking all at once." The officer's expression softened into sympathy that felt like dismissal. "People go quiet on trains. Happens. Doesn't mean there's a conspiracy." "It's not a conspiracy," Mara snapped, then forced herself to breathe. "It's organized theft, coordinated." He typed, slow. "Any physical harm?" "No." "Any threats?" She hesitated, thinking of the planted card. "Not directly." He nodded like that settled it. "We'll log it. If there's a pattern, we'll see it." Mara left with the sick feeling of being filed away. Outside, rain fell in thin sheets, London's wet breath. Mara's reflection in a shop window looked older than it had yesterday. On the walk home, she replayed the words the man with the coffee had used. "Just watch where you walk." It sounded like advice. It was a warning. That night, Mara noticed something new. Her phone showed a missed call from an unknown number. No voicemail, just a blank ping of absence. She ignored it. 10 minutes later, her sister texted, "Did you call me?" Mara stared at the screen. "No." Her sister replied, "Weird. I got a call from your number. Nothing on the line." Then it hung up. Mara's skin went cold. The crew wasn't only operating in the carriages. They could reach beyond the tunnels, beyond the rails, into the digital parts of her life that felt safe. Mara sat at her kitchen table, lights off, watching the rain blur the street lamps. She thought of the tone, small, clean, precise, like a key. A key didn't have to open just one door. She opened her laptop and searched for anyone who'd mentioned silent carriage online. Most posts with jokes, ghost stories, people trying to be witty. But buried among them were a handful of accounts that sounded like hers. Sudden hush, missing items, a feeling of being watched. One post from 6 months ago ended with a sentence that Mara's stomach twist. "I reported it, and the next day my oyster stopped working." Another, "They put a stolen wallet in my bag, nearly got me arrested." And then one more, chillingly plain. "If you hear the tone, don't be the loud one. They punish loud ones." Mara closed the laptop and stared at the black screen, seeing her own face reflected, eyes wide. The next time the carriage went silent, she wouldn't just be a target. She'd be a problem. And problems, she was beginning to understand, were what the crew dealt with best. On Friday, Mara took the tube with a different plan. Not to catch them, not to expose them, just to understand. She wore nothing worth stealing. Old phone, no cards, cash tucked in an inner pocket. She left her handbag at home and carried a cheap tote with a paperback inside to give her hands something to do. She chose a time when the lines were busy enough to hide in, but not so packed she couldn't move. She boarded at Green Park and stood near the middle of the carriage, watching reflections in the window. The first 10 minutes were normal. People talked, a couple argued softly in French, someone hummed without realizing. Mara's shoulders loosened. Then the tone. This time she felt it like an electric pulse. The carriage quieted.
But Mara didn't. She didn't speak. She remembered the warning, but she didn't lower her head either. She watched. The crew moved with subtle efficiency. One person created a distraction by dropping something small. Another used the moment of bending and apologizing to brush too close to a pocket. A third stood just slightly in the way, blocking view. It was frightening, not because it was violent, but because it was clean. Then Mara noticed something she'd missed before. Not everyone responded. A man near the doors, headphones on, didn't go quiet. He was in his own world, tapping his foot lightly. When the silence fell, he didn't join it. He didn't even seem to notice. Immediately, the crew adjusted. A woman shifted to stand between him and their target. The tall man angled his body to block the headphone man's view. The signal wasn't for the whole carriage. It was for those who knew the language. A private instruction disguised as a public mood. Mara's mind clicked into place. The silence wasn't just a tool to hide theft. It was a membership test. If you went quiet, you were part of the environment. Useful, safe, predictable. If you didn't, you were a variable. And variables were managed. At the next stop, the headphone man stepped off. As he did, the woman near him brushed his shoulder, murmured sorry, and slipped away. He didn't react, but Mara saw it. The woman's fingers had touched his bag zipper, not opening it, just confirming it could be opened. Like a measurement, like marking a future target. Mara's mouth went dry. This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was a system of selection. She stepped off at the same stop as the headphone man. The platform air felt colder. The crowd spilled out and reformed into different shapes. The headphone man walked up the stairs, oblivious. Mara hesitated, and then, against her own caution, she caught up and said softly, "Excuse me." He turned, eyes annoyed. "Yeah?" Mara kept her voice gentle. "On the train? Did you notice anything odd? The quiet?" He stared at her like she'd asked him to solve an equation. "No?" Mara swallowed. "Are you sure no one—" He cut her off, irritated now. "Look, I don't know what you're on about. I'm late." He walked away. Mara stood alone on the platform as the crowd flowed around her, feeling suddenly exhausted. The system worked because most people didn't want to see it, and the few who did were easy to isolate. The next day, Mara found the TFL staff member again. By accident or luck, she wasn't sure. He was at King's Cross, near the help point, scanning the platform with the watchful posture of someone who'd learned not to relax. When Mara approached, his eyes tightened in recognition. "You," he said softly. "I told you not to get involved." "I'm not trying to be a hero," Mara replied. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. I need to know what it is, who they are." He looked around, then gestured her toward a quieter corner where the noise of the station blurred into background. "They're not a gang in the way you're imagining," he said. "Not lads with knives. It's mixed. Men, women, different ages. They rotate, they blend." "How do you know?" Mara asked. His mouth tightened. "Because my colleague was accused. 2 months ago. Wallet found in his locker. CCTV somehow missed the moment it got there." Mara's stomach sank. Was he guilty? The staff member's laugh was short and humorless. He could barely work his phone. He wasn't a criminal. He was a convenient scapegoat.
Mara's mind flashed to the planted card. They can put things on you. He nodded. They can create a story where you're the villain. Mara stared at the tiled wall, feeling anger rise like heat. So why hasn't anyone stopped them? The staff member's eyes flicked upward toward cameras, toward speakers. Because they aren't just stealing, they're controlling. They pick targets. They punish anyone who disrupts. They make it inconvenient to fight back. Mara whispered, "The tone." He didn't answer directly. People call it a ghost signal, like a haunting. But it's not supernatural. It's just clever. Mara took a breath. "Can you help me?" The staff member hesitated. Then, very quietly, he said, "There's a carriage, late evenings. Not always the same train, but a pattern. They like the stretch between stations where people relax, phones out, minds elsewhere." Mara's heart beat hard. "You're telling me where they'll be." "I'm telling you where it happens," he corrected. "I'm not telling you to confront anyone. If you do something stupid, you'll get hurt, or worse, you'll get blamed." Mara nodded. "I won't be stupid." He looked at her for a long moment, and his expression softened, almost sad. The city makes people believe silence is safety, that if you don't draw attention, you'll be fine. Mara's mouth tightened. "And they use that." He nodded once. "They use what London already teaches you." He stepped back, returning to his neutral staff face. "If you go looking, don't do it alone." Mara wanted to ask how she could possibly not be alone when everyone else refused to see. But the crowd pressed in, and the moment dissolved. As she walked away, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. This time, it didn't just ring. A message appeared on her screen, plain as a bruise. "Quiet suits you."
Mara's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. She didn't reply. She didn't block it. She stared until the words stopped being letters and became just shape, and then she forced herself to put the phone away. Someone knew. Someone had watched her talking to the staff member. Someone had decided to speak. That night, she called her friend Jonah, a sound engineer she'd met years ago at a flat party, the kind of man who noticed frequencies others didn't, the kind of man who listened the way some people looked. "I need a favor," Mara said when he answered. Jonah's voice was sleepy. "Mara, it's late." "I know," she said, "but I need you to hear something." She told him everything, careful not to sound hysterical because she'd learned how quickly people filed fear away as drama. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, "You're describing a coordinated behavior response, like a cue, like theater." Mara closed her eyes. "Yes, exactly." Jonah exhaled. "Do you have a recording?" "No," Mara admitted. "And if I take one, they'll see." Jonah paused. "Not if you're subtle, and not if the recording doesn't look like recording." Mara's throat tightened. "Jonah, I don't want—" "I'm not telling you how to catch criminals," he said quickly, voice sharpening, as if he could hear the danger in his own words. "I'm telling you how to protect yourself with information. There's a difference." Mara swallowed. "If I get you something, can you confirm it's real?" The tone. Jonah's voice softened. "If there's a consistent cue, I can probably identify it as non-random. But Mara, if they're sending you messages, you are already on their radar." "I know," Mara whispered. Jonah was quiet again, then said, "I'll meet you tomorrow, public place, daylight. If you insist on going back down there, I'm not letting you do it alone." Mara's chest tightened with something like relief. Okay. When she hung up, she sat on her sofa in the dark, listening to her own breathing. She hated that she needed backup just to ride the tube like a normal person. She hated that fear had turned travel into strategy. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. You want to hear the song. Mara's stomach clenched. Then, before she could react, her phone began to play audio. No app open, no link clicked, just sound flooding out of the speaker. A tone. Clean, brief, precise. And in her living room, alone, Mara felt her mouth go dry as her body reacted the way the carriage had. Her muscles stilled, her breath caught. Silence, her silence, arrived on command. And somewhere in London, someone was laughing without making a sound.
Jonah met her the next day outside a cafe near Leicester Square, wearing headphones around his neck like a comfort object. He listened to her describe the forced audio, the tone, the way her body had responded. "That's not normal," he said, brows drawn tight. "That's either a hack or you clicked something without realizing." "I didn't," Mara insisted. Jonah looked at her phone, not touching it like it might bite. "We'll assume you're compromised. New SIM, new handset if you can. At minimum, turn it off when we go underground." Mara nodded, exhausted. "What do I do about the tone?" Jonah's mouth tightened. "We don't play their game." They went down together that evening. Jonah didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man who wanted to go home. That normality steadied Mara more than bravery would have. They boarded the train and stood near the doors. Jonah kept his hands visible. Mara kept her tote bag tight against her. For 2 stops, nothing happened. Mara felt foolish, which was almost worse than fear, like she'd dragged her friend into her paranoia. Then the tone came, faint but unmistakable. The carriage quieted. Jonah's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. He didn't speak, he didn't move much, but Mara could see him listening, the way a dog listens for a whistle beyond human hearing. He leaned close to Mara's ear and whispered, "It's real." Mara's stomach dropped. Jonah's gaze scanned the carriage, finding patterns. Who shifted, who blocked, who watched. He didn't point. He didn't stare too long, but his expression changed, the way it changes when you watch a magic trick and realize the magician isn't doing magic, just misdirection. A man moved too close to Jonah's jacket pocket. Jonah stepped sideways, gentle, as if adjusting his stance. The man's hand missed its target and retreated. Mara expected anger, confrontation. Instead, Jonah whispered, "They're testing us." Mara's pulse hammered. How do we stop it? Jonah's jaw tightened. We don't. Not here. Not like this. At the next stop, Jonah tugged Mara off the train. The doors closed behind them, carrying the quiet away. On the platform, Jonah exhaled hard. They weren't going for money just then. They were watching reactions, seeing who looked up, who noticed the silence. Mara's mouth was dry, and we noticed. Jonah nodded, which means you're not imagining it, and it means they know you're not alone. Mara stared down the platform, where people moved like nothing had happened. Then what? Jonah's eyes lifted to the CCTV dome overhead. Then we treat this like a sound problem, not a crime problem. Mara frowned. What does that mean? Jonah's voice was low. If the cue is the weapon, the cue is also the evidence. We need to capture it without looking like we're capturing it. Mara's stomach tightened. And if they catch us, Jonah's expression turned grim. Then they'll try to write a story where we're the villains.
As if summoned by his words, Mara felt her phone vibrate in her pocket, though she turned it off. She pulled it out. The screen was dark, but a message appeared anyway, glowing faintly like a ghost. 2 of you now. How romantic. They didn't go home right away. Jonah insisted on walking, staying above ground where the sky was visible and the crowds were different. They moved through Soho's damp streets, neon reflected in puddles like spilled paint. Mara felt like she was being followed, even when she wasn't sure anyone was behind them. They ducked into a pub for 10 minutes, then left through a different door. They crossed a road, doubled back, stopped at a newsstand, and pretended to browse. Jonah kept checking reflections, in windows, in dark phone screens, in the shiny paint of parked cars. "Do you see anyone?" Mara asked quietly. Jonah didn't answer immediately. Then, maybe, maybe not, but that's the point, isn't it? They ended up near Piccadilly Circus, under the billboards that made night look artificial. Jonah's face was set, thoughtful. He looked less afraid now and more angry. "This is behavioral control," he murmured, "a cue that turns a public space into a coordinated environment." Mara's voice trembled. "So what do we do?" Jonah took a breath. "We stop trying to win inside their rules. You can't outfight a system designed for silence." He looked at her. "You said a staff member told you some CCTV footage comes back missing. That means someone has access, or influence, or they know blind spots." Mara nodded, throat tight. Jonah continued, "So our only chance is making the silence visible in a way they can't edit easily." Mara frowned. "How?" Jonah's eyes flicked up at the crowd. "People will ignore a story. They won't ignore a pattern." He pulled out a small device from his bag. Nothing dramatic, just a pocket recorder, the kind journalists used. "If we can capture the cue and link it to the exact moment the carriage goes quiet, multiple times, we can show it's not coincidence." Mara's stomach tightened. "And then?" Jonah's voice hardened. "Then you go public carefully, not as a witch hunt, not as here are the criminals. You go public as this is a coordinated safety issue. You force institutions to respond." Mara thought of the planted card, of being framed. They'll retaliate. Jonah nodded. Probably. Mara stared at the neon-lit faces of strangers, the city that kept moving no matter what. "I don't know if I can do this." Jonah's expression softened. "You already are. You just want it to be over." Mara swallowed. "What if the tone isn't just on the train? What if they can send it to my phone again?" Jonah's jaw tightened. "Then it's not just theft, it's intimidation." A shout went up nearby, someone laughing too loudly, bumping into friends. The sound seemed suddenly precious. Mara's phone buzzed again. This time it was her sister. Mara answered, voice shaking. "Hello?" Her sister sounded worried. "Mara, are you okay? Someone messaged me from your number. It said—" Mara's stomach dropped. "What did it say?" Her sister hesitated. "It said, 'Tell her to stay quiet.'" "Mara, what is going on?" Mara looked at Jonah, eyes wide, and felt something in her snap. Not into courage, not into anger, but into a cold, focused resolve. "I'll call you back," Mara told her sister, voice steadying. "I'm fine, I promise." She ended the call and stared at Jonah. "They're using my life." Jonah nodded. "Then we take their weapon and make it evidence." Mara breathed in, tasting damp air and city smoke. "Okay," she said. "One more ride." The last time the carriage went silent, Mara didn't feel surprise. She felt recognition. They boarded late, when the line was quieter and the city's tiredness hung heavy. Jonah held the recorder in his pocket, concealed. Mara stood beside him, tote bag empty, heart full. The train moved. People stared at screens.
A man dozed with his head against the window. For a few minutes, it was just a train. Then the tone came, clean, brief, surgical. The carriage fell quiet. Jonah's fingers tightened around the recorder. Mara watched the faces around them change, heads dipping, shoulders shifting, bodies forming barriers. It happened faster than before, as if the crew had refined the choreography. A hand moved toward Mara's tote, habit maybe, or test. Mara let it. There was nothing to take. Another hand moved toward Jonah's jacket pocket. Jonah stepped sideways, blocking it with his elbow. Calm, casual. The hand retreated. And then, across the carriage, Mara saw the woman in the hat again. The same composed posture, the same phone held close. Her eyes met Mara's. For the first time, she smiled, small, controlled, almost kind. Then the woman raised her phone slightly, thumb hovering, and Mara felt a sick certainty that she was about to send the tone again, closer, sharper, directed at Mara's body like a leash. Mara's mouth went dry. Her limbs wanted to obey. Her lungs wanted to hold their breath. But Jonah leaned in and whispered, "Breathe through it." Mara sucked in air, forcing her chest to rise.
She focused on the train's roar, the rail's rough song, the real world beneath the manufactured hush. The tone came again, faint, but there. Mara's body twitched toward stillness. She breathed anyway. It was the smallest rebellion imaginable, a woman choosing oxygen. Across the aisle, the woman in the hat's smile faltered, just slightly. Not because Mara was brave, but because Mara was unpredictable. The doors opened at the next stop. The crew moved, ready to flow out. Jonah tugged Mara with him, and they stepped onto the platform. The human noise returned in a wash, and Mara felt almost dizzy with it. Jonah didn't stop walking until they were far from the carriage. Then he pulled the recorder out, eyes bright with adrenaline and anger. "I've got it," he said, both tones, and the exact moment the carriage went quiet. Mara's throat tightened. "Is that enough?" Jonah looked at her, serious now. "It's a start." Mara stared down the platform, watching the crowd swallow the woman in the hat as if she'd never existed. Her phone buzzed one last time. A message, short and sharp. "You should have stayed quiet." Mara slipped the phone into her pocket and looked at Jonah. "No," she said, voice steady. "I shouldn't have." And as the next train arrived, wind, noise, life, Mara realized something that felt both terrifying and true. The silent carriage wasn't haunted. It was human, and that meant it could be stopped.
Not with shouting, not with heroics, but with the stubborn refusal to let silence be mistaken for safety ever again.